William Gairdner has been a guest on TVO many times over the years, bringing his conservative gadfly opinions to our viewers in a country where he fears the deck is stacked against conservatives. His latest book is called The Great Divide: Why Liberals and Conservatives Will Never, Ever Agree. And Bill Gairdner, former academic, former decathlete, now author, joins us here in studio. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, you too.
We've done this many times over the years. We were just thinking a second ago, at least the early 1990s was the first time we met.
I think it was,
and
about 1990, 91.
How many of your books have we done together here? Quite a few, I think.
4 or 5, yeah.
Indeed we have. Well, here, let me just get the conversation started by reading this excerpt from your book. We are becoming strangers to each other. This book is one man's effort to change this situation, to help people become unafraid once again. Let's start there. People have always disagreed about issues, Bill. Why do you think it's gotten to the point where we're now strangers from each other?
Well, it's a really good question, and let me start by telling your viewers that this is not about politics. This is about something much deeper. The favorite image I like to use is a fellow standing on the road on a beautiful sunny day and enjoying, the air, and suddenly there's a huge gash in the road that opens up, buildings start crumbling, and he says, "Oh my gosh, it's an earthquake." But of course, it's not the earthquake, it's the consequences of the earthquake. The real earthquake is in the tension between the geological forces that he can't see, way beneath the ground. The Great Divide is about the tension between the ideological forces that we can't see, that are out of sight. And my job as a writer is to make them visible to the reader.
You're saying we're afraid. What are we afraid of?
Well, I think over time, as we've kind of lost the old sort of moral and social and cultural factors that binded us together more or less as one people. You could say those came from our Judeo-Christian heritage, they came from our respect for, the common law tradition and the law, they came from a whole bunch of things. But as they began to fade, people sort of lost the common glue. And so they retreated from the confidence that they had so much in common that they didn't have to be afraid to speak their minds. And now what we have instead is people are separate and splitting from each other. I began to notice this first at, say, a cocktail party. I'd see someone I didn't know across the room. I'd walk over and try to strike up a conversation, and I would say something that I thought was a fact or an indisputable argument. And the person would look at me and say, "Well, it's true for you, but it's not true for me." And then came my moment. I love it. When I would say, "Well, it can't be true and false at the same time. One of us must be wrong." This was an invitation to have a debate, like a reasonable debate, and find out which of us it was, because I always feel it's a win-win situation. Either you're right and the other guy's going to learn something, or you're wrong and you're going to learn something. But for goodness sake, let's have the debate.
But did the guy walk away?
Walk away and drink with someone else. Or I'm giving a public speech somewhere and someone will stand up and say, "Mr. Gairdner, I'm outraged by what you've been saying." Another moment. And I say, "Well, you couldn't be more outraged than I am. Now what's your point?"
Well, let's do an example here. Let's take something that is, on the face of it, true. Children need moral influence.
Yes.
Right? On that, you agree with many people. And then you go on to say liberals and conservatives agree on that. The liberals see a bigger role for the state and its schools. Conservatives see a bigger role for parents and religion. Here's my question, why can't both sides acknowledge that there's a little bit of truth in both sides' positions?
Well, I think you're right, there may be a little bit of truth, but the question is what little bit and how much and where and what's the source? I'll give you an example. This business of education and children and needing moral formation. I mean, Aristotle, way back, a great teacher, by the way, said that we all have a human nature which is universal and common to all human beings. We're not horses or antelopes or pelicans. We're human beings. We have a common human nature, but we also have a second nature. And our second nature is formed by our parents, our religion, our belief system, which is a common language of our society, and so on and so on. So it is true that both these things go on. What we are as a basis which never changes, and what we become in a way through these kinds of teachings. But we only are able to develop our second nature because we have this common universal human aspect to us. So where do liberals and conservatives come down on this side? Well, we find in the liberal tradition from the 18th century forward in particular, you can see it in people like Rousseau, that the object of politics, I'm quoting, is to change human nature. Wow, what a devastating thing to say to an Aristotelian, for example, who's on the more conservative side. You can't change human nature. You can modify, you can improve, you can kind of do that sort of minor thing, but you can't change human nature. Well, the liberal says, yes, you can. That's why we need the state. That's why we need public policy. That's why we need so much of your taxes, because we want to manipulate and organize and change human nature for the better. Why? Because we want to create the kingdom of heaven on earth. Well, the older religious type of person said, no, no, no. Human beings have a universal character. It's fallible, it's weak, it's prone to evil if you don't surround it with law, you know, and order and restraint and that kind of thing, prone to selfishness, et cetera, et cetera. And so these two sides can never agree. That's why the subtitle of the book, Why Liberals and Conservatives Will Never Ever Agree, because you can't say human nature is completely malleable and non-malleable at the same time. It's either one or the other.
I'm going to return to a theme that you explore quite often in many of your books, and here goes the next excerpt. There would be more freedom of individual will for all things personal and private, especially those having to do with sex and the body, such as abortion rights, easy divorce, homosexual rights, contraception rights, transgender rights, pornography rights, gay marriage, and soon euthanasia rights and more, made available to all equally in the name of freedom. So many questions emerging out of this, but let's start here. You do seem, and when I say you, I guess I mean you conservatives seem, some of you conservatives, seem very obsessed with sex. Why is that?
Well, first of all, let me respond to the label of conservative. I do tend to style myself that way, but I'm careful in the book to define what that is. I may not be a political conservative because conservative parties often do very liberal things, you know, so I'm staying away from political labels.
If you're not a conservative, what are you?
Morally, theoretically, I'm very interested in conservative philosophy, conservative moral philosophy. But in The Great Divide, I do make a point of trying to show both sides. And just for your viewers to know, if they're wondering where they stand, there's 14 tables in the book, one after each chapter.
No, I give you.
Which says, where do you stand?
You lay out, if you're liberal, here's what you believe. If you're conservative, here's what you believe. You do that frequently through the book. I don't want to give people the impression that this is a polemic and you're trying to beat people over the head.
Good.
No, I think let's get that clarified. But having said that, you look. I mean, the subjects that you have chosen to discuss are themes you return to quite frequently, and one of them is sex. And I'm just wondering why the focus?
Well, I think this is a very interesting story. I looked at the liberal democracy of the West, and I asked myself, what happened to classical liberalism? And the conclusion I came to was that liberalism, as it came to the shores of North America, both in Canada and to the USA, started as what I call virtue liberalism. I mean, the Pilgrims and the people who came here, they were all Christians. They're all interested in virtue. The only reason you should be free, they argued, was so that you could be good. We don't hear that much these days, by the way. That was stage one liberalism. Stage two came through the influence of people like John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, and others in our own Canadian tradition. And that second stage was about property, individual rights, free choice, and all that kind of thing. And we had a good time with that for about a century and a half. But then people we called liberals in that tradition, the classical liberals, started to say it's not enough. It's not enough to be free. I mean, they argued that, okay, the rich and the poor are both free to sleep under park benches. You know, that's not good enough. We need to fix things so that they can be free in the true sense of the word. We need to make them more equal. So stage three was equality liberalism. That idea was that instead of just arguing that we should get everybody to the starting line at the same time, which was a noble ideal, the argument was we should get them to the finish line at the same time. That meant you needed the enormous force of the state, government, taxation, policy, and all that kind of stuff. That meant the liberal democracies had embraced a contradiction. The contradiction was you can't have a foundation in true liberty and equality in the forced sense that they meant at the same time.
I did ask you about sex once upon a time.
I'm getting to it.
So okay, good.
Stage four was this. They said, how do we resolve this contradiction? There was no orchestra leader resolving it, but it came out of the woodwork. And the resolution of the contradiction was this. You split the body politic, right? You split it into a public body and a private body. In the public body, you bring the state to bear and the enormous regulatory powers of the states in all the Western democracies. And we can see the taxes go up as an integer of that engagement of the state. But in the private body, you leave people as free as possible, freer than any time in all of human history. You know, gay rights, pornography rights, transgender rights, gay marriage rights, abortion rights, euthanasia rights, and all these things. We are freer than we've ever been in all our history, in that sense, sexual and bodily sense of the word, you know. But we're less free than we ever were in the other sense. Our political and economic and legal freedoms have been vastly reduced. We don't seem to care. Why? Because we love the sex and the bodily freedoms. The one was a trade-off for the other. It was a Faustian deal. And I don't think it's going to change real soon. I remember when Francis Fukuyama wrote his famous book about the end of history. Well, first of all, history never ends unless people end.
End of history, question mark.
End of history, question mark.
As he always reminds people.
Yeah, does he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but it never ends unless, people end. But libertarian socialism, as I call it, it's not real libertarianism and it's not real socialism, but we have combined enough of both by splitting the public and the private body to say that this could very well be the end for a long, long, long time because people like it.
Another excerpt from The Great Divide. Conservatives find themselves villainized as dinosaurs and the targets of liberal outrage, that tiresome word, and why rational discussion between liberals and conservatives can no longer settle fundamental differences of opinion. Okay. Maybe one of the reasons that liberals and conservatives can't come together on this, I'll just ask you, how old is the Earth?
How old is the Earth?
Yeah.
Well, I think we're talking 4.5 billion years or something like that.
There are, I guess, too many people in this society who think the Earth is 5,000 years old. How do you have a debate with somebody if that's their answer to the question?
Well, you can't, because both of these opinions, you could argue, are matters of faith. Materialism, pure materialism, what people call reductive materialism, for example, is a faith argument. These people will say, and it's been very useful in scientific matters, by the way, these people will say that that's all there is. In the huge neuroscientific debate between mind and brain, that's what we're getting. People who say that mind is just a product of brain. And other people say, no, brain is matter. You're right, it's all matter. It's electrons and all this kind of thing, molecules. But mind is not. Mind is immaterial, insubstantial, cannot be measured, cannot be weighed, has no extension, as Descartes said.
Okay, but that's what I'm trying to get at here is how do you have a conversation? You're regretting the fact, or I guess ruining the fact, that liberals and conservatives can't have a rational discussion anymore. How do you have a rational discussion with somebody who thinks the Earth is 6,000 years old?
Well, first of all, you start by saying, let's elevate the discussion. I mean, I can't go to the 6,000-year-old thing because I don't know anything about it, and I don't believe that myself. But I'm saying that faith, one way or the other, underlies many scientific viewpoints, and it underlies many theological viewpoints. For example, people often say things like, well, there is no God. And I say, how did you come by your faith? And they say, what do you mean, how did I come by my faith? I just told you I have no faith. I said, well, I believe there is a God, but I can't prove it. You believe there is no God, and you can't prove that. So we both have a faith. Now let's have an argument, or debate about the particulars here. And so what the Great Divide is trying to do is to elevate the discussion by getting away from the emotion, getting away from the outrage, getting down to the fundamental basic principles, which are huge on both sides of the argument, so that we can have a more sophisticated debate. I don't like to see the country going silent. I think it's been going silent for 20 or 30 years, in the sense that you go to a dinner party, lots of people around, some, you don't know others. You know as well as I do, there's 15 topics that will not come on the table.
You cannot discuss them.
People are frightened. What are they frightened of? They're frightened of the other guy's emotion. They're afraid of being vilified as some kind of evil person because of their viewpoints. Left or right, it doesn't matter. It happens on both sides. I say that's a very unfortunate circumstance for Canada, in fact, for all the Western democracies.
This may be one of those topics. Here we go, another excerpt. Despite significant conservative resistance, homosexuality, as the psychoanalyst Charles, you're going to help me with his name? Is it Socarides?
Socarides, yeah.
Socarides has put it, has shifted in little more than 25 years from the love that dare not speak its name to the love that can't shut up. That's a very funny line, incidentally. Is this society of ours obsessed with homosexuality right now?
I think that homosexuality has been in the normalization of homosexuality. And by the way, one of the things that concerns me, not just about homosexuality, but about many things, is that I believe that human beings can normalize anything. Anything can be normalized. You can normalize, gassing people in ovens. You can normalize all kinds of terrible evils and think it's just fine. That it's the proper means to the end that you have in mind, I'm not prepared at the moment to start opening up the whole can of worms on homosexuality, but I will say that it is being normalized. It has been normalized in about, 23 countries of the world by now. Of the 193 countries in the world, I don't know if it's going to go that far. And I believe one of the things that a lot of other countries really find bizarre and strange about Canada is that we allow men to marry and women to marry each other.
Well, when you say normalized, that suggests it's abnormal to begin with. Is it abnormal?
It does. Well, I'd say the conservative, in this book, the conservative argument would be that it's against nature. It's against nature.
It's throughout nature, though.
Pardon me?
It's throughout nature. There are animals that do.
Well, that's an argument.
this.
That's an argument that has to be demonstrated. We can have a whole show on that topic. I'm not convinced by that.
Well,
I'm not.
Isn't that a fact? I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but I have certainly talked to people who say homosexual practices by animals is natural. It is throughout nature.
You can certainly find males in nature liking each other, hanging out together for comfort, and you can find a male dog trying to jump on another male dog, but you're not going to find true sexual penetration and all the things that go on with normal sexual behavior. You don't find that in the animal kingdom.
The conservative says that gays and their liberal sympathizers in the media, government, and the courts stand guilty as charged. They have intentionally set up a parenting model that is against nature. Now, again, do you have any squeamishness about saying these things?
But listen, no, not at all, because I'm trying to take both sides of the argument. What will the liberal say? The liberal in the Great Divide will argue the opposite. He'll say, no, it's my sexual orientation. Well, he's appealing to a fundamental, deep, natural orientation that he has and feels, and when he comes out of the closet, he feels he's finally expressing it. I grant him that argument. I grant it. Whether or not it's good for society to normalize it is a whole other question.
You grant him the argument, but you don't believe the argument, right?
Well, I think there are arguments on both sides and no proof on either side. And you have to get down to really discuss these things in a fundamental and serious way without shouting and yelling and, going to the outrage, the pull-down outrage card. I think that's important for our society to do that. And, that's what I try to do in this book. And a lot of people who read it come back to me and they say, oh boy, I've been walking one way and talking another, And I say, okay, the book's doing its job. Can't we get to a point in this country where we can have serious discussions about fundamental principles on both sides? Maybe there's more than two sides, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And elevate the discussion. I think it's been going down for a long time, and that's why I wrote the book, to try to get it back up again.
Okay, but whether it's gay rights or whether it's abortion or whether it's euthanasia, is it fair to say your side is losing the debate?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. People often ask me, well, what do you say my side? As I say, I'm trying to take the referee
Bill,
position.
You're being a little precious here. You're trying to take the referee's position, but you're not a referee. You got skin in the game.
And I say that's true, and I confess it in the book. And I say, look, it's like playing chess against yourself. One of you has to win.
Yes.
You can't just play neutrally all the way through the game.
What do you think about the fact that despite your best efforts for the last half century to try to get us to sort of see the world one way, you are losing the argument right now?
Yeah, sure, of course. It doesn't mean I shouldn't have the argument. I'll tell you how I feel, how I characterize myself. People often say to me, how do you feel after 25 years of this? I'll tell you how I feel. I feel like a man who's been standing on a rock in a leftward drifting sea all this time. And in the distance, I see a ship kind of in the mist, and I hear voices. You know what they're saying? Look, over there, there's a man drifting to the right. See? It's you who are drifting, not me. And everybody who takes your side, I'm assuming you're taking a liberal side. I'm not drifting. I'm trying to make the argument.
I'm just being devil's advocate here. You know
Good.
that. You know that.
I wouldn't want to accuse you of being one or the other, Steve.
Thank you.
But I guess you could say I am taking the Aristotelian sort of position in these arguments, and I have been from the start. And I love to hear the other arguments because it gives me food for debate and it animates the conversation. Goodness, And I'm prepared to be wrong, but I haven't heard strong enough arguments yet. And what I've heard is a lot of emotion. And I'll tell you what I think underlines the homosexual debate, the abortion debate, and the euthanasia debate as part of this libertarian socialism. It's the transfer of our whole form of thinking from a society based in biology and human nature to a society based in will. Human choice and will. And human will and choice, the desire to satisfy our own appetites, whatever they might be, because don't forget I said you can normalize anything. And that's the direction I think we're heading, and we're trying to normalize. We've already normalized abortion, killing babies in the womb. We've already normalized homosexuality and gay marriage. We're going to normalize euthanasia. The court just started us down that road.
What do you think's next?
All I'm saying is,
what do you think's next?
I talk about those things in my book. I'm not sure what's next. Can there be much?
You've suggested in the book that, I think, what do you call it? Intergenerational sex is next?
Yeah. Well, and groups like NAMBLA in New York City, that's where they're based, I think, they'll say, sex before 8 or else it's too late and all that kind of stuff. People glorifying intergenerational sex as a harmless, freedom-loving liberation of youth. Well, I'm saying, okay, how far can you take this idea of liberation, which comes from liberalism, after all? How far should we be taking that? And shouldn't we be turning around and maybe examining it in a more precise and profound way? And that's why I wrote the book.
And as usual, Bill, you get us thinking, which is why we like to have you on TVO. The Great Divide: Why Liberals and Conservatives Will Never, Ever Agree. Bill Gairdner, great to have you back here at TVO.
Thank you for having me.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.